Hamline professor David Schultz has taught in Ukraine and is just back from visiting that region. He also has a new book on the region and the growing concern about expanding aggression by Russia. I spoke to him earlier this morning. And joining us now is Professor Schultz. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, you just came back from a trip to Lithuania, which of course is in Eastern Europe. You have a new book on democratic resilience in the Baltics. You also taught a class sort of with a person in Ukraine in this trip. Tell us, how are things going over there? What are people feeling? Do they think peace will happen?
Well, first off, they don't think peace is going to happen, but if they do so, think at all it's going to happen. Right now, they think it's not going to happen on terms favorable to Ukraine or favorable to Eastern Europe. And their belief is because of the way that the Trump administration is pressuring Ukraine in the terms of the peace plan. They basically view it as the United States forcing Ukraine into peace, regardless of what the consequences are. So again, pessimistic about peace, but two, if it does occur under the current situations, not very optimistic regarding the stability for democracy in Ukraine or Lithuania.
All right, and Lithuania, of course, is that group of countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union that now are independent, and they're the countries that are really worried about a Russian invasion. Should Ukraine go to Russia, or there be a very favorable settlement, how worried is the person on the street that you talked to or that you met? Is this a real fear that exists there, and how strong is that fear?
Well, first off, it's a very strong fear at this point. Lithuania is located between Russia on the east and to the west of it. So it's kind of sandwiched in between the two of them. And I was talking to one person that I know there, not an academic, but somebody I know there, just a friend. And she said to me that if Ukraine falls, Lithuania is next. And so everybody is thinking they're next. And when I was teaching at the military academy, which is where I was teaching this past week there, everything is revolving around how does Lithuania prepare, not just militarily, but culturally, politically, everything, to be prepared to address perhaps a Russian physical attack. Because right now, Lithuania is already being bombarded with what's called cyber warfare in terms of disinformation, hacking, and so forth. And so the average person is very, very worried and conscious about what's going on right now.
The president has denied that he is his plan or his peace plan was designed by the Russians, is overly sympathetic to the Russians. Frankly, people in his own party are saying that it is too sympathetic to the Russians. How do people feel about President Trump and this latest peace plan there?
Well, they certainly have not been happy with President Trump for the last few years because Lithuania is a very small country, just a couple of million people. It's not very powerful in terms of militarily. It relies upon NATO, the NATO commitments, especially that NATO commitment from the United States. And from Donald Trump's first term on, where he's questioning NATO and questioning whether or not the United States would come to defense of other countries, they've been worried. And certainly now they're even more worried because they're thinking that not only is NATO not reliable because of the United States, but the United States is essentially giving to Putin and to Russia whatever he wants. And so there is this very acute consciousness, especially among those who are older, who are old enough to remember when Lithuania was part of the Soviet Union. They remember what it was like in terms of the repression. And they're, again, very, very worried in terms of the future in the coming year.
All right. Professor David Schultz, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.